Beginner tips for growing tomatoes. Tomatoes must have full sun, at least 6 hours or more of direct sunlight each day. Number 1, always plant marigolds near your tomatoes. It helps them grow better. Marigolds are amazing because they deter pests. Number 2, always plant basil near tomatoes. I have so much basil, I love it. It protects them from bugs and fungal diseases. For healthy tomato plants, always trim the leaves below the first tomato. This gives your tomatoes lots of nice airflow. Also, prune those suckers off in between the armpits. You can easily just pull them off. Try and always water at the base and do not get the leaves wet. Try not to overhead water with the hose, especially when it's hot out. This is my favorite tip for tomatoes. Do you like bananas and have banana peels? Put them in water. Put them in a jar of water, and when it changes colors, the potassium-rich banana peels are excellent for plants like tomatoes, peppers, or flowers. I put them on there and tomatoes love them. Follow for more. Here are 5.
All right, guys, you got your tomatoes set out. They're a couple of weeks. They've been out for a couple of weeks. They're past the transplant shock, but this plant is not big enough yet to really start setting out fruit. I want this plant to focus on growing and being healthy and making more leaves. So I'm actually going to come in here and trim off any fruit that has started to set. And I'm also going to trim off this first flush of flowers that have set. I don't want it flowering yet. If I have any branches touching the ground, I'm going to cut those off. Those will be diseased. And then look in here, you see these little suckers that are coming out from between a stem and a branch. I'm going to pinch all those off. I don't want those, okay? This little sucker that's up here on top, I'm going to leave that one only, and this main side right here. So I'm going to have 2 main stems that are going to grow up, and that's all I'm going to allow. Go prune your tomatoes, guys. All right, guys.
Farmer Dean here, and I'm planting tomatoes today in my container. These are ones that have grown. I've lifted them so that they're down there deep. I've got a hole dug. I've got to put in my one of my hacks, about half a cup of eggshells. I'm going to put that right in there and cover that up with dirt. Then we're going to take the Epsom salts, which is another hack of mine. That's for root growth, and that's for the magnesium. Now all I have to do is one other thing, put companion plants in here to keep those darn hornworms off from the tomato plants. 2 companion plants that I'm putting in is, one is basil, if I can get it out of the pot, and we're just going to put that in here. And the other 2 is I'm going to put in some garlic. That also deters bugs. So there's only 2 more things to do. One is, got to use my mulch. Got to have mulch in there, so we keep that moisture in there. I'm going to put at least an inch on it, maybe a little bit more. And the other thing is, I'm going to water it in, but I'm also going to give it a shot of fertilizer. This is from Thrive. It's one of the many that you can buy. I like this one. I'm going to water this in really hard. You want to learn how to grow sweeter and bigger tomatoes, pest-free? Then download my 7 hacks on how to grow sweeter and bigger tomatoes in the bio.
Here's an important tip for growing tomatoes. A common mistake that most people do is plant their tomato plants in the ground and then just leave them there. Tomato plants are very prone to diseases, so it's important that you trim off the bottom sets of the leaves so that the plant isn't touching the ground, just in case there are any diseases lingering within the soil. It's recommended that your tomato plants sit above 3 to 4 inches, but I like to do 4 to 5 inches just to make sure. Another mistake people do is water on top or in between their tomato plants. You don't want to do that because it will promote fungal growth. Instead, water your tomato plants at the very base of the stem. Depending on your water system, it may vary. We mainly use this drip system. Sometimes it will spray up, so what I like to do is mulch it on top so that none of the water is splashing into the tomato plants. Another common mistake is not supporting your tomato plants. You could use a tomato cage, or you can get creative with the support system. You want something to support the weight of the tomatoes once they grow in. With the weight of the tomatoes, they will lean over and the plant can potentially break off. Another thing I recommend is companion planting your tomato plants with basil. Basil is known to repel insects like hornworms and is believed to increase yield. Before you know it, you'll have beautiful, delicious tomatoes. Don't forget to share and save this post and follow for more garden tips. Here's an important tip for
Here's your gardening tip of the day. When you buy a tomato plant that's gotten really tall, and they often do this time of year in the greenhouse because it's so warm in here, we have to water them all the time to keep them looking healthy, but then they stretch like crazy. And it's fine, it's just that they get kind of tall and a little bit skinny looking. So the secret is, when you get a tall tomato plant, that you need to bury most of the plant in the ground. So if you're planting it in a container, you're going to want to put it in the very bottom of the container and fill the rest with soil. If you're putting it in a garden, what we suggest you do is you dig a trough, You lay it on its side and you cover the whole plant with soil as much as you can to about here. Like honestly, 3/4 of the plant I would cover up with soil. And the reason you're going to do this is you'll notice on the base of this stem that there's all kinds of fine little hairs. And what those will become if you cover them with soil is roots. And it makes a much stronger tomato plant. It doesn't flop around in the wind. It's just going to give you much more of a plant, like a root base, in order to feed your plant, and you'll have a much better, robust tomato crop.
Do you want to get more out of your tomatoes?
I would wager a guess that your tomatoes are looking pretty wild like this.
Now, if you want to increase your harvest, we're going to have to prune these things back pretty heavily. And these pruning methods are for indeterminate style tomatoes. As this style of tomato is pretty much a vine, it will keep growing and growing and growing, and the growth points are from these suckers. Now, what's a sucker? A sucker is an additional stem that is found at a 45-degree angle between a leaf branch and the main stem. If you want to do no other pruning to this plant, at least remove the suckers to help your plant produce bigger fruit. At the bottom of your plant, you want to remove at least the first foot of foliage, as the sun isn't touching these leaves anyways.
Now at first it seems really scary, and I'm a pretty aggressive pruner, but doing this improves the airflow. It takes away some of the structures that plant is working to support, and then we'll put it into the fruit. Trust me.
And make sure to like and follow for more tips. Do you want to get more out of your tomatoes?
Hey guys, onto the farm here, and today I'm going to show you the best way to plant your tomatoes for maximum success. So there's a couple things we want to do to our tomato before we even get it in the ground. First thing, I want to prune it. So I want to take off all these lower leaves and all these lower branches and just leave the very top leaves on there, and I'll tell you why in a second here. So we've taken off all these bottom leaves and we have just our top leaves on here. That's perfect. Next, I've got a bucket of water here and I want to hydrate this. So I'm just going to dunk it in the bucket of water until the bubbles stop. Once the bubbles stop, I know the water seeped all through the soil, and it's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to give this plant a head start with some nice wet roots. And two, it's going to allow this to pop out of this container a lot easier than if it was dry. Now, I'm not worried about the roots being root bound because tomatoes are very good at creating new roots. So all along the stem here, we're gonna create new roots, and we're gonna do that one of two ways. We can either bury this super deep right up to the neck, or we can plant it sideways. So for this one, we're gonna plant it sideways because this bed is not super deep. So we're gonna plant it sideways like this, and we're just gonna lay it down in the trough and leave the top exposed. We've got the root covered, and we just want to keep that vertical. Now, I've also noticed that this little guy is trying to make a flower. So I'm going to pinch this flower off. I know everyone wants to sort of get their first fruit super fast, but we're going to pinch this flower off for two reasons. One, we want this plant to focus on putting its energy into growing. So if we let this plant produce this flower now, maybe we get a tomato, maybe we don't, but we're sacrificing a lot of long-term or down the road production by allowing it to fruit so early. So it's kind of like a kid, you know, you don't want your kid to have babies just because they can. You want to wait until they're mature, until they're old enough and responsible enough in order to handle it. And that's the same thing with your tomato plants. And in the long run, you're gonna have much bigger plants and get a lot bigger yield, all right? If you learned something, hit the like button, subscribe, follow, and plenty more to come. All right, see you guys, bye.
Don't plant your tomatoes on their own. Instead, let them hang out with one of these 3 plants.
And they'll thank you with better harvests.
Thank you, Tomato Daddy.
First, we have a plant that produces a ton of small flowers, which provide nectar to a ton of awesome bugs.
And those bugs lay eggs in tomato-eating caterpillars.
And that plant is dill. This next plant doesn't make much sense
Until you realize it grows mostly underground.
and puts out a ton of bushy foliage, which prevents the dreaded soil splash, meaning any disease prevalent in the soil can't get to the plant. That plant is a sweet potato.
This next one is almost as popular as tomatoes themselves.
They help suppress weeds, also exude chemicals that keep weeds from sprouting. And you should transplant at the same time you put in your tomato. And that plant, of course, is the cucumber.
And that's why I say, don't plant your tomatoes on their own. Instead, let them hang out with one of these 3 plants.
And they'll thank you with better harvests.
Thank you, Tomato Daddy.
First, we have a plant that produces a ton of small flowers, which provide nectar to a ton of awesome bugs.
And those bugs lay eggs in tomato-eating caterpillars.
And that plant is dill. This next plant doesn't make much sense
Until you realize it grows mostly underground.
and puts out a ton of bushy foliage, which prevents the dreaded soil splash, meaning any disease prevalent in the soil can't get to the plant. That plant is a sweet potato.
This next one is almost as popular as tomatoes themselves.
They help suppress weeds, also exude chemicals that keep weeds from sprouting. And you should transplant at the same time you put in your tomato. And that plant, of course, is the cucumber.
And that's why I say, don't plant your tomatoes on their own. Instead,
Never plant a pepper directly in the ground, otherwise it will rot within a week. However, after 20 days, a miracle occurred. The seeds inside the pepper germinated, recorded by a time-lapse camera. After 40 days, the seed emerged from the ground. It took 80 days for her to reach the surface. Growth is very slow. It takes 100 days to get a pepper plant. It is possible to grow peppers at home with a few simple steps. You can reduce this time to 2 months, including the flowering and fruiting period. Start by removing the seeds from the peppers you eat and placing them on a piece of toilet paper. Cover the seeds with wood ash to promote plant rooting. Fold the toilet paper and cover the seed with a layer of cotton to create a natural environment for germination. Place the paper flat in a vase, moisten it with water, and cover lightly with soil. In just 20 days, you will have a small forest in a pot, twice as fast as planting directly in the ground. Now it's time to transplant. Choose a different planting method, cut a plastic bucket and make some holes in it. Hang it upside down with a rope. Place the pepper seedlings inside the inverted bucket to save space. The plants will grow in the opposite direction. Add soil and food waste as organic fertilizer to provide essential nutrients to the seedlings. On the 15th day after transplanting, the leaves will be almost as big as the palm of your hand, and small flower buds will begin to emerge. Feed the plants with rice and small fish. Although it is not a common fertilizer, rice contains carbohydrates and micronutrients that promote plant growth. Be sure to dry cooked rice before using it to avoid attracting insects or bacteria that are harmful to plants. A month after transplanting, you will clearly see the root system extending upwards, and the flowers and peppers will sprout normally without the need for artificial pollination, as this plant is self-pollinating. After 2 months of transplanting, your peppers will be bigger than your fist. Harvest them, remove the seeds, and reuse them. You can even make nutritious juice with the pepper pulp in the juicer. Want to try the flavor of peppers? Don't forget to like and follow. Never plant